Moscow, Idaho, exists in the American imagination as a place of profound safety, a pastoral college town nestled in the rolling hills of the Palouse. It is a community where students felt secure enough to leave their doors unlocked, believing the greatest dangers were icy roads or a wandering moose on campus. This idyllic image, however, was irrevocably shattered on the morning of November 13th, 2022. A silence fell over the rental house at 1122 King Road, a silence born not of peaceful slumber, but of a brutal, inexplicable violence that claimed the lives of 4 promising young people and plunged a town and a nation into a state of shock and fear. The Idaho Four, an American tragedy built upon a foundation of hundreds of exclusive interviews, is far more than a simple true crime procedural. It is a deeply researched, empathetic, and analytical exploration of a crime that resonated with a peculiar and powerful frequency across the country. The book seeks to answer not just who committed these horrific acts, but why this particular tragedy captivated the public imagination so intensely. It deconstructs the collision of vibrant, youthful innocence with a cold and calculated evil. It examines the chaotic and often toxic role of social media in the modern pursuit of justice. And, most poignantly, it chronicles the multifaceted nature of grief, the ferocious advocacy of families unwilling to be silenced, and the resilience of a community fighting to heal. The Innocents. Before they became known collectively as the Idaho Four, they were individuals, each navigating the exhilarating and uncertain terrain of college life. The heart of the social world at 1122 King Road was the profound and inseparable bond between Kaylee Goncalves and Maddie Mogen. Their friendship, forged at the age of 12, was the anchor of their lives. They chose the University of Idaho specifically for its vibrant Greek life, a world they were eager to embrace together. Kaylee, the extroverted hustler, was accepted into her top choice, Alpha Phi, a sorority known for its popular girls and homecoming queens. Maddie, more of a girly girl and a talented photographer, was chosen by Pi Beta Phi, a respectable but less prestigious house, a result that left her in tears. Yet their bond proved stronger than sorority rivalries. They navigated this separation with a maturity beyond their years, maintaining their deep connection in real life while carefully curating their social media feeds to project an image of growing independence within their new sisterhoods. This performance of separateness, a strategic nod to the rules of Greek life, dissolved with the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic, which sent them back to their neighboring hometowns and reaffirmed their reliance on each other. Their individual ambitions were taking shape with clarity and purpose. Kaylee, leveraging her can-do attitude, secured a full-time job offer in IT with Extreme Networks in Austin, a future she was eagerly planning for. Maddie, an only child with a quiet strength, applied her artistic eye to her sorority's benefit, running the official Pi Phi Instagram account and elevating its profile, all while pursuing a career in marketing and planning a future in Boise with her boyfriend, Jake Schriger. Their senior year dream was to finally live together, and the house at 1122 King Road was to be the stage for this joyful reunion, a perfect capstone to their lifelong friendship. The other love story that animated the house was the magnetic pairing of Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin. Xana was a force of nature an irrepressible spirit who introduced herself with the disarming line, "I'm Xana," pronounced Xanax without the X. She is a resilient and charismatic young woman who overcame a difficult childhood, marked by her mother's struggles with addiction, to become the vibrant, smiling center of her friend group. Ethan was her perfect counterpart. Described as a prince of a young man, he was a tall, gifted athlete and a devoted triplet, deeply bonded with his siblings, Hunter and Maisie. Their worlds collided at a Champagne Shackles party, a quintessential college mixer where Ethan, a new pledge at the Sigma Chi fraternity, was immediately captivated by Xana's effortless charm and authenticity. Their relationship evolved from a playful friendship, with Xana becoming his sorority, Big, into a deep and committed romance. Ethan, the laid-back athlete, was endlessly patient with Xana's boundless energy. Xana, in turn, found in Ethan and his close-knit family a stability she had never known. In the months before her death, she expressed a desire to grow up and be taken more seriously, a sign of her maturing love for Ethan and her hope for a future with him. Saturday, November 12th, 2022, was a celebratory game day on campus. The day was filled with the rituals of college life, pre-gaming, taking photos, and moving between parties. A key moment, captured for posterity, was the final group photo taken outside the White's apartment building, which Kaylee posted to her Instagram, a smiling, vibrant image of the friends unaware of the darkness to come. As the day turned to night, their paths diverged slightly. Ethan and Xana attended a formal with Ethan's sister before ending the night at the Sigma Chi House. Kaylee and Maddie went downtown to the Corner Club, a popular student bar, before making a late-night stop at the Grub Truck for food. In the early morning hours of November 13th, they all converged back at 1122 King Road. The final documented moments of their lives were achingly ordinary. Xana was scrolling through TikTok, and Kaylee, wrestling with her recent breakup, made a series of unanswered calls to her ex-boyfriend, Jack Ducour, who was asleep just a few doors down. He slept through the calls, a fact that would haunt him forever. In the downstairs bedroom, one of the surviving roommates, Dylan Mortensen, drifted in and out of a drunken sleep. The walls were paper thin. She heard the girls come home, heard them go upstairs. But then, through the haze, she heard things that didn't make sense. A cry she thought might be Kaylee's. A voice saying, "There's someone here." Later, she thought she heard Xana crying, and then a man's voice, strangely comforting. "It's okay. I'm going to help you." A thud, and then the dog, Murphy, started barking frantically. Paralyzed by fear and confusion, Dylan opened her door 3 times. The third time, she saw him. A figure in black, face covered by a mask, walking toward the back sliding glass door. She saw his bushy eyebrows. Their eyes met for a split second. She slammed her door, locked it, and, after a series of terrified texts and calls to her roommate, Bethany Funk, who was in another downstairs bedroom, she sprinted to Bethany's room. The two of them, terrified and bewildered, locked themselves in and eventually fell into an exhausted, uneasy sleep, convincing themselves it must have been a nightmare. It wasn't until nearly noon the next day, when the silence from upstairs became unbearable, that the true horror began to dawn. A frantic call to friends, a plea for someone to come check the house. It was their friend Hunter Johnson who walked up those stairs and into Xana's room. What he saw was a scene of unimaginable carnage. He calmly told the girls outside to call 911. The 8-hour gap between the crime and that call would become a source of intense and often cruel public speculation. But in those first moments, there was only shock and a dawning, world-shattering grief. The promise of Moscow, the safety of that house on the hill, had been annihilated. The making of a killer. Kohberger's formative years were marked by social alienation and a growing internal turmoil. The book details a history of being bullied and struggling with his weight, which prompted his father to enroll him in a boxing gym in a desperate attempt to build his confidence. But this discipline was soon overshadowed by a descent into heroin addiction and a pattern of petty crime to support his habit. This was not harmless teenage rebellion. It was a series of significant betrayals. He stole repeatedly from the father of a friend, a former Navy SEAL whose home he allegedly stalked, and he stole from his own sister, an act that led his father to call the police on his own son. This period, punctuated by stints in rehab, is captured in the raw, angry rap lyrics he posted online, which spoke of a mind that was pissed and a feeling of running from his own derangement, a window into a psyche defined by rage and self-pity. In what appears to have been an attempt to reinvent himself, Kohberger turned to academia, choosing a field that would prove to be tragically ironic, the study of criminal minds. His time at DeSales University, particularly under the mentorship of the renowned criminologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland. His intense fascination with a class called psychological sleuthing, where students analyzed mock crime scenes. In this academic setting, he learned the methodologies of murder and investigation, that killers often experience tunnel vision, that crime scenes are frequently staged, and the critical importance of avoiding DNA contamination. His study of spree killers, with a specific focus on Elliot Rodger, the so-called incel martyr, who went on a murderous rampage in 2014, fueled by sexual frustration and a profound hatred of women. His academic interest may have been less about understanding crime and more about perfecting it. Kohberger's move to Washington State University to pursue a Ph.D. in criminology was his one last try at a new life. But instead of a fresh start, his time at WSU was marked by escalating red flags. As a teaching assistant, his behavior toward female students was described as antagonistic and misogynistic. He was known for his excessively harsh grading of women and his tendency to interrupt them in class in a manner that was perceived as an assertion of intellectual dominance. These actions led to multiple complaints from students and a series of meetings with concerned faculty members. This pattern of behavior culminated in his termination from his teaching assistant position in the weeks just prior to the murders. His academic pursuits were not just a biographical footnote. They were a potential toolkit for his own alleged criminal enterprise. There is a deeply perverse feedback loop at play. His study of how killers are caught seems to have directly informed his methods. He learned about the importance of avoiding DNA, and he allegedly left only a single trace sample on a dropped knife sheath. A mistake perhaps born of the tunnel vision he studied in class. He learned that white men often choose knives as a weapon. He allegedly scrubbed his car and apartment of evidence, a clear attempt to cover his tracks. This transforms him from a simple monster into a far more complex and chilling figure. an academic who perverted his knowledge in an attempt to commit the perfect crime. The first 6 weeks, the investigation began in chaos. It was immediately clear that the small local force was overwhelmed by the sheer scale and brutality of the crime. This initial disorientation was compounded by a critical misstep in public communication. Law enforcement's initial assurance that there was no threat to the community was quickly followed by a stark reversal, advising residents to shelter in place. This conflicting messaging shattered public trust from the outset and created an information vacuum that would be filled by fear and speculation. As the local community descended into a state of panic, a massive law enforcement response was mobilized. The Idaho State Police, ISP, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, descended on Moscow, forming a multi-agency task force to tackle the sprawling investigation. Amid the gruesome scene at 1122 King Road, investigators found their single most important clue: a tan leather knife sheath bearing the K-Bar brand and the U.S. Marine Corps insignia, lying on the bed next to Maddie Mogen's body. On the snap of this sheath was a trace amount of male DNA, the killer's one mistake. This piece of evidence became the anchor of a methodical and technologically advanced investigation. Analysts painstakingly combed through hours of surveillance footage from the quiet residential neighborhood, eventually identifying a white Hyundai Elantra that was seen circling the house multiple times before the murders and speeding away shortly after. They pulled cell phone data which suggested a pattern of stalking, showing the suspect's phone had been in the vicinity of the victim's home on at least 12 occasions prior to the attack, almost always late at night. The final piece of the puzzle came from a cutting-edge forensic technique: investigative genetic genealogy, IgG. When the DNA from the sheath failed to produce a match in criminal databases, investigators used public genealogy websites to build a family tree, which ultimately led them to their suspect, Bryan Kohberger. While investigators were quietly piecing together the forensic evidence, a second, far more chaotic investigation was playing out in public. On platforms like Facebook, Reddit, and TikTok, a global army of armchair detectives emerged, spreading rampant misinformation, wild conspiracy theories, and, most damagingly, false accusations against innocent people. The surviving roommates, the victim's ex-boyfriends, and other friends found themselves targeted by a vicious online mob, their grief compounded by public suspicion. This digital chaos was amplified by a relentless national media presence that laid siege to the small town. The intense pressure forced the MPD, led by Chief James Fry, into a defensive, tight-lipped communication strategy that often backfired, making the department appear secretive or incompetent and further fueling the public's frustration. The 6-week manhunt culminated in a dramatic pre-dawn raid on December 30th, 2022. Acting on the evidence they had painstakingly assembled, a Pennsylvania State Police SWAT team executed a dynamic entry into Kohberger's family home in the Poconos. He was found awake in the kitchen, reportedly sorting trash into separate bags. The subsequent search of the home and his car yielded a trove of potential evidence, and Kohberger was taken into custody, ending the period of uncertainty that had terrorized a community and captivated a nation. The investigation into the Idaho murders illustrates a central paradox of 21st century policing. On one hand, law enforcement was empowered by astonishingly powerful new technologies. The case was ultimately solved not by a smoking gun or a dramatic confession, but by the silent, digital, and genetic clues the killer left behind. IgG, a technique that was virtually science fiction a decade ago, proved essential in generating a lead from a minuscule DNA sample. Cell phone tower data and digital video canvassing allowed investigators to reconstruct the suspect's movements with chilling precision. On the other hand, the investigation was nearly overwhelmed by a different kind of technology, the instantaneous and often toxic ecosystem of social media and the 24/7 news cycle. This created a chaotic second investigation in the court of public opinion, which actively hindered the official one by spreading false leads that had to be chased down and by traumatizing innocent individuals who were publicly accused. The Moscow Police Department found itself fighting a war on two fronts, a forensic one against their suspect and a public relations one against a global digital mob. The aftermath. In the wake of the arrest, the families of the victims navigated their grief and their fight for justice in starkly different ways. The Goncalves family, led by Father Steve and older sister Olivia, adopted a public, confrontational, and relentless stance. Frustrated by what they perceived as a lack of transparency from law enforcement, they hired their own attorney, Shannon Gray, and became fixtures in the national media. They used their platform to challenge the official narrative, pressure the prosecution, and fight against the gag order that sought to silence them. Their public-facing Facebook page became a hub for information and advocacy, a testament to their refusal to be passive observers in the case of their daughter's murder. In contrast, the Chapin family chose a more private path. While they did grant a single controlled interview to debunk harmful rumors, their primary focus was on healing and creating a positive legacy for their son, Ethan. They channeled their energy into the Ethan Smile Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing scholarships, and Stacy Chapin authored a children's book to celebrate his joyful spirit. Their approach was one of quiet dignity and a stated trust in the legal process to deliver justice. The Mogen and Kernodle families remained largely out of the public eye, illustrating the deeply personal and varied spectrum of grief and response to unimaginable loss. The initial court proceedings, where Kohberger, represented by public defender Ann Taylor, chose to stand silent rather than enter a plea, forcing the judge to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. The defense began to lay the groundwork for its case, filing motions to challenge the validity of the IgG-derived DNA evidence. The prosecution, led by Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, announced its intention to seek the death penalty. However, after months of legal maneuvering and delays, the trajectory of the case shifted dramatically. In July 2025, Bryan Kohberger accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for the prosecution taking the death penalty off the table. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The book, therefore, stands as a chronicle of the fight for a trial that was ultimately averted, a resolution that brought certainty, but left many questions, particularly regarding motive, unanswered. The murders left an indelible mark on Moscow and the University of Idaho. The book describes the immediate aftermath as a period of campus-wide fear, which led to a mass exodus of students and the implementation of enhanced security measures including increased patrols and self-defense classes. The house at 1122 King Road, a site of pilgrimage for gawkers and a constant painful reminder of the tragedy, was eventually demolished in a symbolic, though controversial, effort to allow the community to heal. In a more lasting tribute, the university and the victims' families established scholarships and a memorial healing garden, creating a legacy of hope and remembrance from an act of unspeakable violence. The official investigation, by necessity, was methodical, slow, and opaque. Faced with this reality, the Goncalves family did not wait passively. They launched what was, in effect, a parallel private investigation. Empowered by social media and a deep understanding of the digital world, Olivia conducted her own digital forensics. They hired a lawyer not just for legal advice, but to act as a public cudgel against the authorities. They used the national media as their megaphone, ensuring their voices were heard and their frustrations were aired. This reflects a broader societal shift where victims' families are no longer content to be silent observers. They are active and at times disruptive participants in the legal process, leveraging modern tools to demand a seat at the table. This phenomenon has clear benefits, such as keeping pressure on investigators and uncovering potential leads. But it also carries risks, including the spread of misinformation and the creation of an adversarial relationship with the very officials tasked with delivering justice. The unsettled narrative. The Idaho Four, an American tragedy, is more than a masterful work of true crime journalism. It is a rich, multi-layered social document that captures a uniquely American moment. Patterson and Ward have crafted a narrative that moves beyond the procedural to explore the profound human cost of violence, the intricate and often paradoxical nature of a modern police investigation, and the seismic impact of social media on our collective experience of tragedy and justice. It is a story about the lives that were lost and the life of the man who took them, but it is also a story about the rest of us, about how we consume, process, and participate in tragedy in the digital age. Even with the legal finality of a guilty plea and a life sentence, the central, haunting question of why remains officially unanswered. Bryan Kohberger offered no confession, no explanation, no remorse. The book presents a compelling and well-researched theory, rooting his actions in a toxic brew of social failure, academic arrogance, and an alleged adherence to the misogynistic incel ideology exemplified by his predecessor in violence, Elliot Rodger. But the absence of a definitive motive from the killer himself leaves a chilling void at the heart of the story. This ambiguity is, perhaps, the book's final unsettling lesson, that some acts of evil defy easy explanation, leaving us to grapple with the terrifying possibility of violence without a discernible cause.